Well, you all know the phrase, when in Roma, do as the Romans do? Well. It feels as if there's another cliche that we should add to this, which is that eventually, as footballers always tell us, the fans will hate you till you win. And interestingly enough, Roma's owners have now, we believe anyway, have become the new owners of Everton.
Yeah. I think that the way in which they were rubbed were a little bit more to do with the firing of Daniele De Rossi, who was a huge character for them at the club. Not just a club legend because of the player he was on the pitch, but also someone I think like the fans could identify a bit more with than someone like Totti, who was kind of like a god, whereas De Rossi was more like one of them, but on the pitch. So there was a slightly different dynamic there, and he was someone who was extremely valued by them. And I think that's always the risk when they brought him in, like as caretaker. That it was kind of like it's a little bit of echoes of Solskjaer at Man United. They'd had Mourinho in there. Everyone was really sad because Mourinho had been there and made everyone sad. And then you want to bring someone in to get everyone excited again. And what better way to do that than to bring in like a genuine club legend who everyone knows is a really passionate guy. He came in and had an immediate impact, but then couldn't really follow up on that. And they've not had a great start to the season. And in pure footballing terms, maybe there's some you can justify them. I mean, they didn't win in their first four, and the ownership are better placed than we are to evaluate whether the quality of the work the coach is doing is good enough or not. So maybe they could see already that this guy is not going to be the guy for us. But you then have to kind of fire a guy who is incredibly important to the fans emotionally, and even if it ends up being justified as a decision, it creates a lot of unpleasantness at the club, and I think that's what they're angry about more so than Everton, and really I think for Everton fans or Everton curious people who are listening to this and wondering what kind of owners the Friedkins are, the thing I would say in their defense is that they've spent a lot of money. They sunk a lot of money into Roma, and it's their money. it's money that exists. And like if you look at potential owners these days, getting people who are like definitely have money, it's definitely their own money. The money exists, and they're not like awful human rights abusers in some kind of way, as far as we know. That's kind of the best you can hope for sometimes. Now, are they good at owning a football club? I guess it's a slightly different question, and it feels like a bit of a black mark against Dan Friedkin, that he did hire Mourinho and let him spend quite a lot of money on old dudes. That feels like one of those things you should avoid. But I just think with the situation Everton are in, just they're in such trouble in terms of everything going on at that club. And we're going to stay on the continent. I'm just saying, at least with the Friedkin group, the money is there, and they've been willing to spend it at Roma, and I'm assuming they will be willing to spend it at Everton.
Ultimately, though, Andy, it's about results, isn't it? Like I started off saying, if you can turn things around, Ivan Juric has turned around this Romans defeat at the beginning of the season with a 3-0 win. And I wonder whether the Friedkin or the owners, the Friedkin group, whatever you think of them, aren't minded to sort of think, when we get results at Everton or at Roma, the fans will support us. And ultimately, that's where their strength will come from.
I see where you're coming from, and Juric's first game was very convincing, especially considering the absolute firestorm that he was preparing it under, because there was the sacking of De Rossi, which led to fans protesting. So for the first, there were all sorts of banners and chants, and for the first half hour of the Udinese game, which was at the Olimpico, which was at Roma Stadium, the ultras didn't come in. They just stayed out, and others didn't join in the chants. So, that put a really peculiar atmosphere over things. So for Juric to deal with that, and I think Juric is a really good coach. He did a decent job at Torino and at Verona before that. But I think you look at Roma's history, and it taps into what Lars was saying. After Francesco Totti, you could argue that Daniele De Rossi is the most important figure in the history of the club. Results, you can say it's a results business, but results aren't everything, particularly if you're Roma and you've got a history where you're a really big club who hasn't won an awful lot over time. So what makes you feel that it's your club if you're a Roma supporter? It's what you stand for, it's what you represent, and it's the guys who represent you and always did over 2 decades, and Daniele De Rossi is one of those. Now, quite before we get to the bit where you say, okay, he's been given a completely new team, it was a kind of chaotic transfer window, and then they give him 4 games to bed it down, which is ridiculous for any coach. Especially once, they as the owners look stupid, given that in June they gave him a contract extension until 2027. It looks like their mistake. It doesn't look like his, and that's clear. But if you're not about winning all the time, what are you? You're about the way you represent yourself and the way you treat people. And the fact is, and Roma fans have brought this up again and again on social media and elsewhere, one of the most important people in the history of the club was given 3 paragraphs of cheers, but you're not the guy for us anymore. I mean, you can't treat people like that, and you can't treat someone like that like this. And so, look, there are a lot of positive things that the Friedkins have done, and as Lars says, they've spent their own money rather than nicking it from another club or another club in a multi-club partnership. That's not what they're about. They have invested a lot of their own money. They have made headway in building a new stadium, which is vital for their financial health in the future. And that is, as anyone who knows anything about Italian planning knows, not an easy undertaking at all. So they've got the city of Rome to the table, and they've made headway with that, which is great for them and could be really important for Roma going forward. But on the other hand, they have made some quite unusual decisions. The investment in Mourinho being one of them, certainly. And just like any club, and we see it again and again in something like Welcome to Wrexham, don't we? You have to realise that you're the custodians, and you have to at least be on nodding terms with the tradition and the values of the club.
I did actually. I spoke to someone who works in football who made the joke that the Mourinho thing. Sometimes it almost feels like for some owners that hiring and eventually getting burned by Mourinho is kind of like a rite of passage. It's like at some point you gotta, as a football club owner, at some point you gotta do it. It has to be experienced. Everyone's got to make that mistake.
But just on the note of Ivan Juric, would you agree with Andy that he's certainly the coach for now?
So I just think it's an interesting appointment because Roma are a strange entity in that they're one of those clubs that's they're the biggest club in the world in Roma. And I think that was the way in which, as much as I make I say negative things about him, there was one sense in which Mourinho suited them, which is this larger than life character, makes a big splash in the media and is the big guy. That side of it really worked at Roma. It was just shame about the football, which was often terrible. But so they often tend to kind of almost gravitate toward these big characters, whereas Juric is a little bit more of a work. He's done good jobs at slightly more. It's hard to find the right phrase for it, but provincial, I guess, almost teams. But his Verona team was really unpleasant to play against, and he's done a good job at Roma as well. So he's someone whose coaching credentials are solid, but he's not a huge name and a mega charismatic, entertaining showman. And his teams haven't been always amazing to watch. But maybe there's a thing to be said for just having a pretty competent guy in charge. But it's kind of hard to know where you are with Roma again, because they made quite a few changes over the summer and immediately fired the manager, which makes me think again. I asked a Roma supporting mate of mine for a quick comment on the Friedkin as owners ahead of this pod. And I just got to feel that it kind of seems like sometimes it feels that they kind of fumbling around and blindfolded, just trying to do stuff and see if there doesn't seem to be a brilliant sort of master plan at work here. But again, if you're an Everton fan and that alarms you, at least they have money and are willing to spend it, which I think from Everton's perspective is all that really matters right now.
I think the one thing to note, though, in terms of how deeply they've upset the supporters, this is not going to go away in a hurry. And so almost independently of how well Juric does in the short term, for him to... it's not about him winning the fans over. They've not got beef with him. It's the owners and some of the players as well who are perceived to have undermined De Rossi. Now, you think in that Udinese game, Cristante got booed when he came off. Lorenzo Pellegrini, and that must have really hurt him because it's his hometown club and the club that he's always loved, he got booed on the way off as well. So it doesn't feel like they're ready to forgive in a hurry. Now, I do think he has the tools to work with that could make something pretty good. I mean, as Lars said, they're not relying on crocked players anymore, which is a real plus. You had Tommaso Baldanzi, who was bought last season with the idea of being a sort of junior locum to Dybala, I don't know, Zola to his Maradona, if you like. Someone who could take a bit of the physical pressure off him by playing for him sometimes. And, you know, he scored a brilliant goal after combining really well with Dovbyk. So perhaps that's something as well that's going to help them. But unless they get in the Champions League, like it won't justify anything that's happened. And you know, that's far from a given. That's a really steep climb.
Also, just to puncture all this very serious football chat, also worth noting for anyone who's not aware, Dan Friedkin, in addition to owning Roma, also flew one of the Spitfires in Dunkirk, the Christopher Nolan film, which is a pretty wild thing that actually happens. Also an avid golfer, so man after my own heart.
Yeah, thank you for that, Lars. That was just what this conversation needed.
I thought it was.
Oh, and it's about
actually
that
designed
time.
a golf course at some point, I think.
And it's about that time that we ask you...
Flying Spitfires, designing golf courses, owning Roma. What a life.
Yeah.
If I was that rich, that's pretty much where I'd aim for, I think.